Welcome to the Hard Skills Show, where we discuss how to develop the nuanced hard skills, meaning the most challenging soft skills needed to make a real impact through your leadership. Now, this episode is for all those impact-driven leaders. We answer the question, how can I create change in my industry while staying true to my values and without burning out? That's key because we have a lot of burning needs and desires to change the world. I know I do. Rebekah Miel here is with me, and I know she does. And I'm just so excited to talk with her about how to do this in a way that doesn't burn us out when we have so many different ways of wanting to impact the world. So welcome to our season 5, where we will be focusing on making a greater impact. So this is perfect for this season. I'm your host, Dr. Mira Brancu. I'm a leadership consulting and coaching psychologist, founder of Tower Scope Leadership Academy, an associate professor, a Psychology Today columnist, author of Millennials Guide to Workplace Politics, and had my own leadership career before transitioning to helping teams and high-achieving women navigate their leadership complexities. Now, Rebekah Miel, let me introduce her. She is that lone pair of headlights driving in the opposite direction during a hurricane evacuation. I have known her for probably about 6 years, and that is absolutely the best description I can imagine for her. She has a also fascinating background that you will hear more about today, but her current job title is creative director of her own creative shop, Miel Creative, where she helps make beautiful sense out of a complex world for B Corp, nonprofits, and other purpose-driven organizations, while also balancing the death-defying feat of raising pre-teen twins and listening hard for how to be a good citizen in her adopted hometown of Durham, North Carolina, close to where I live. So welcome to the show, Rebekah.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited for this conversation.
Me too. Well, you have had a fascinating life story of so many different kinds of experiences and jobs. You described to me sweating through a Tvec suit in the lower ninth. You described eating curry in a refugee camp in Una-Watuna, sorry.
Una-Watuna, yeah, you got it.
Or even being a musician, co-running a DIY music space. I mean, these are fascinating experiences. And so I would love for us to just talk a little bit more about those experiences. What sort of led you to those experiences? What is the thread through these experiences, especially when we talk about being kind of an impact-driven person who sort of leans into those kinds of experiences?
That's a great question. Yeah, I found myself in a lot of surprising places throughout my, both what I do in my career, but also in my personal life as well, fundraising and, going to Sri Lanka after the tsunami in 2005 and all those different places. But for me, I think there's a couple different things. One is impact means staying true to my values and whatever work I'm doing, finding where the work I'm doing in the space and the people I'm communicating with, how am I staying true to my values in those spaces? And one of those is, because I'm such a visual person, is being witness to things that are happening, which is why I've ended up in, the lower ninth after Katrina and all sorts of different places. I recently was in Eastern North Carolina and Northampton to see the devastation there done by the pellet industry in their forests. So it's witness and also making sure that I'm listening. I would say, even though I'm a designer, I'm a visual person, at least 50% of my job is listening, because then I hear where these things are relating to my values and I can connect to people in ways that feel authentic and true, rather than coming in with a decision about what I need to do to make impact in this space. I need to step back and listen and witness for a little bit and then move into that space.
And a couple of things I'm picking up from that. One is, so you are a creative designer, and to me that means you can have any job or any role and still lean into those experiences of putting values first and thinking about how you can sort of make an impact, make a difference, regardless of kind of what you do. And part of, you know, your experience with how you do this, it sounds like, is listening and bearing witness, like as a visual person. So I'd love to hear more about how did you come to that? How did you come to sort of, this makes me feel like I can make an impact, or I feel connected to this if I can just listen and bear witness?
So the piece you said about making sense out of a complex world, I think it was realizing that sometimes I'm in places that are uncomfortable or, require some version of a balance between my how comfortable I am versus where we're at. So being able to be in those spaces and then taking that information typically visually and being able to translate it. So that making sense of, I think I realized that that is sort of a space where there's so much conflict and disagreement, and being able to find that space in between where maybe both sides of any conversation can talk to each other. That is a place where I think there's a lot of impact, and it just takes time and patience, and like I said, listening and showing up to be able to make that translation. So for me, that looks like design, but sometimes it also just looks like holding a community conversation or holding space too.
Yeah, I really resonate with that. What's interesting is that I feel like I do that in my profession. It's a totally different profession than yours,
Yeah.
which is, clinical psychologist by training, organizational psychologist, leadership development coach, that kind of thing. And I just actually closed out a conversation with two people who had a massive, painful, falling out. And it was, from one person's perspective, racial tension. From the other perspective, it was more about feeling, pushed to engage in a way that was felt judgmental. And they both, for a long time, as I met with them, had their positions, their perspectives, but it felt like there was something that they were not necessarily speaking to or seeing. And we kept talking about the lens, like the lens through which we see is not visible to somebody else. You have to sort of make it visible in some way. And that's the complexity that I come at. And, it came to finally this amazing point where they were really just very emotional and finally feeling connected. That doesn't always happen, but it's an amazing experience to bear witness to that when it comes to that. But it takes a lot of work and effort to kind of deconstruct the language and go back to just the humanity behind all the language we sort of like pile on top in order to make sense of the world. I'm just kind of wondering how that occurs for you as a creative in your design process.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that's one of the challenges is nobody's wrong. They're having different conversations, and it's how you communicate that, which is also going back to listening. Like, how are you saying this that I can relay this information to you? What is that gap in the middle? And sometimes it is things that are in design or in like the strategy work that we do that isn't obvious. Like, we're often talking about climate impact, climate change, sort of these larger scale, sort of controversial issues. And our approach is just sometimes it's a scavenger hunt. Just like go outside, go pay attention to one tree in your yard, like find these little steps that get sort of moved, not necessarily in the middle, but a different understanding of, go and talk to a community that's being impacted by this, or hear from that community in a different way. So I think that lens, of really sort of adjusting what the language is, knowing that in both cases, those people are taking risks to be able to have a new perspective, and being patient and taking time to make sure that the way we're presenting design isn't shaming people. It isn't making people feel bad about their choices, but finding ways that people can participate or listen or engage or be right where they are and just sort of understand a little bit more too.
Yeah. Can you give us an example? So like, as a creative director in your current role, right? What kind of projects do you take on as an impact-driven company? And if you could like walk me through an example of what it takes to go from what people come to you with and where you land and how that connects also to the sort of like impact-driven focus of your company.
Impact driven. Okay. So as an example, I have a client who does work in regenerative ag in the food space, and sometimes people come to me with, I need a logo or XYZ thing. And it's sort of taking a step back, looking at what do they really need? Is it a logo? Is it new messaging? How are they connecting with their community? The next step is working with their stakeholders. So we often do stakeholder interviews. So we're not just listening to the client, but we're listening to the folks that are impacted by their work as well, and asking them like, what do you hear about this? What impact does this organization have? Where do you think they could, add to things where, like, what benefits do they bring? Where do they need to pull back? We compile all of that together. And then from that, we decide what the piece is. And it sometimes looks very different from what the client came to us originally. And sometimes it's pretty similar. But the impact piece of that is making sure that we're not only that same thing I said before, like I'm not showing up in a space where I have a preconceived notion about what the client needs. They don't have a preconceived notion, but we're listening to the work that is being done in the community and finding the place that we can make more impact. And this isn't necessarily just like social or environmental impact. It's also, we're often working with small businesses. So I'm not going to sell somebody something that they don't need. So how can I make an impact for them so they can be a more sustainable business? Like what piece do they actually need? And what piece will keep them being able to continue to do the work that they're doing too?
That's so interesting. I feel like it's a lot more than what you would imagine for a creative design company, that there's like market research involved. There's like marketing and communication involved, I'm hearing. There's the branding piece, but the branding piece is driven by a lot of like listening and stakeholder engagement. And then there's just like you hoping to help the company be sustainable and grow, but in a way that also matches your values and their values. Is that right?
Yeah, and I think that's a challenge. I mean, we talk about being a creative studio, but really our goal is to create impact. So like you said, I could have done impact in any job. So this is my skill set, but also how can we continue to make those ripples expand further too?
Yeah, absolutely. We're reaching an ad break. When we come back, I'd like to hear like your thoughts on, can any company be set up to be impact driven? And if so, what does that mean? What does that even mean to set yourself up that way? So you're listening to The Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Brancu, and our guest today, Rebekah Miel. We air on Tuesdays at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. You can find us on LinkedIn or YouTube at talkradio.nyc, and we'll be right back in just a moment.
Are you a conscious co-creator? Are you on a quest to raise your vibration and your consciousness? I'm Sam Leibowitz, your conscious consultant, and on my show, The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, we will touch upon all these topics and more. Listen live at our new time on Thursdays at 12 noon Eastern Time. That's The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, Thursdays 12 noon on talkradio.nyc.
Are you a high-achieving, growth-oriented leader? Are you interested in developing your authentic leadership while creating a healthy, inclusive workplace? Hi, I'm Dr. Mira Brancu, host of The Hard Skills on talkradio.nyc at 5 p.m. Eastern on Tuesdays, where we discuss how leaders develop the hard skills needed to make a greater impact. We interview experts, have live coaching, and tackle these challenges. Listen to The Hard Skills on Tuesday at 5 p.m. Eastern on talkradio.nyc.
Are you a business owner? Do you want to be a business owner? Do you work with business owners? Hi, I'm Stephen Fry, your small and medium-sized business or SMB guy, and I'm the host of the new show, Always Friday. While I love to have fun on my show, we take those Friday feelings of freedom and clarity to discuss popular topics on the minds of SMBs today. Please join me and my various special guests on Friday at 11 a.m. on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC. Uplift, educate, empower.
Welcome back to the Hard Skills with me, Mira Brancu, and our guest today, Rebekah Miel. Before the ad break, we were starting to talk about like whether any company can be impact driven. The way that you started describing what you do, I thought that seems like a lot of companies could really lean into that as well. What are your thoughts on that?
That's a great question. I think it's really about making a decision. So, running a business, we talk about COGS a lot. So the cost of goods. I think that you need to, if you want to be an impact-driven business, impact has to be one of your COGS. It has to be one of the levers in your business, much like any other, revenue or vendor that you work with. It has to play into the bottom line of your business in order for it to be sustainable and resilient. So sometimes that's difficult for a mid-sized business. I think you can stay small and be really clear about what your impact and values are. Or sometimes in larger businesses, there can be like companies have whole impact departments, ESG departments, things like that. So I think some of the principles can be applied to the work that you do, especially if we're talking about stakeholder work, like stakeholder-driven work, like I was talking about. But I think it needs to be right-sized for the business, and it also needs to be really clear, like you need to make a decision very clearly about what impact you want to have. You can't make all of the impact everywhere. You have to make a decision about, this is the one space I want to choose to make impact, and this is why it works for our company and our values, and be very clear about that, both externally and internally too.
Really interesting. I have a million questions. Okay. The first is, why is it, I am hearing what you're saying about like, it might be easier for bigger companies who have an entire department focused on impact, right? And I can also hear how a smaller company could be more agile to lean into some of these things. What makes it challenging for a mid-sized company? And actually, like, what's your definition of mid-size, and what makes it challenging for that kind of company?
Okay, good question. What's mid-size? I would say from the world that I work in, I would say mid-size is probably like somewhere between like, I don't know, 5 to 15 million in revenue, like around 15 to 20 people. So in that space where especially we're talking about service-based businesses where profit margins are at a specific point where everybody has to be working to do their their job that they're hired for. Sometimes because some of this work takes time, it just has to be accounted into like the work of those employees. That's sometimes easier, I think, to absorb in a bigger company, and a little bit, like you said, easier to pivot and be agile in a smaller company. And in the middle, I think it's a little bit difficult because you just have to track it very closely. And again, make decisions about what impact is as well. If it's something that comes naturally to the work that you do, then I think that's just an easy thing. But if it is something that has to be added into or, sort of thought about as a cog, as like a piece, a function of the job, then it's a little bit more difficult. That said, I also feel like it is really, it's really important for businesses to consider how impact affects their bottom line and their community as a whole. I don't think it's really an optional thing, but I think it is more challenging for mid-sized businesses.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so if actually, let me take this a different direction. Let me ask about your own journey first. As your company grew, morphed, changed over time, developmentally and your own perspective, what did you learn about what you had to do and think about when it came to how you focused on impact with your company?
That's a great question. There's a lot of different ways that we've had to negotiate impact. So one is the space we're in, we get asked for a lot of free work or pro bono work, which, we work with a lot of nonprofits and movements. So deciding what percentage of that do we want to do, are we able to do and stay sustainable? And then also what work is considered impact work, and also how does everybody fit into that? Like, where do personal values and business values align, and how does that make a decision about clients? So it has meant a lot of different things for me running my business over the last almost 20 years, deciding what configuration, what works, what creates most impact. So like some of the work that I love doing is when it is a small business. Like right now we're working with a farmer in Louisiana who's trying to build a CSA. And for her, what's really important is she needs like a business card and a brochure, like things that are really simple and just get the word out about her farm that she's building. But and that creates like a real tangible impact in her life and in her community. But that's not something that is always scalable, and like sometimes where the true impact is for us or for me is not always like a scalable, we can't 10 times a business card and make that a ongoing, I don't know, profitable thing as well. So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
You also mentioned the personal versus company values.
Yeah.
And so have you been in the situation, or have you seen other situations where you as the owner and CEO of your company have your vision, and then you've got employees who like really want you to go in a direction with impact? Like, why don't we also do this? Why aren't we also in this space? Have you experienced that tension? And if so, how did you sort of navigate that? Or have you seen others trying to navigate that space, and what did they do?
Yeah, it's definitely something that we've experienced internally. We, at one point we had done a really simple like values card sort, and it was illuminating to me that I can't always have my personal, it is not a one-to-one overlap, my personal values and my business values, because it is really two different spheres. I bring my values to work, but there are times when I have to make decisions for the company rather than for me. And I think there's sometimes a tension of, we should move in this direction, we should work with a particular client, or also, what if we just did this thing to bring in more revenue, and having to actually say, like, reiterate again that this is the values that and we also, everybody did a card sort, so we agreed on a set of values, and like these are the values that we're coming back to. But it definitely causes a lot of tension. But it was enlightening to me to see those two things sort of be a little bit in conflict, where I always thought like I am my business and I live my values through my business. But I also see other organizations definitely get pulled in different directions, and sometimes it even causes a lot of conflict in the organization, where especially if there's more than one founder or like a funder, and organization sort of break apart, like this is the direction that we want to go in versus this is the direction the funder wants us to go in, which can be really difficult for nonprofits in particular.
Absolutely. Yeah, I had a client once that really struggled with whether to seek venture capital funding because of the fact that her company was very focused on very specific diversity, equity, and inclusion values that she did not want to compromise. And she was worried that if she took on external funding, what could that mean? in terms of various pressures that she didn't want to deal with, and face. And that is a really just the way that you describe your own process and how she described hers and things like that are just, I think, help you make more intentional decisions. If you didn't do that values card sort, if she didn't think through that piece, you might be led by a lot of shiny objects, a lot of exciting things, a lot of in a lot of different directions, but it might pull you away from the core values that you initially set out to do. And every time you visit making this decision and revisit your original values, I think it helps you sort of recommit or more intentionally design, focus, make decisions instead of, not visiting these conversations, not visiting the values, and then finding yourself in a situation where like, how did we even end up in this situation, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think in this space too, there's so much pressure to scale, and scale is fast. Like, we don't always work with startups, but connected to startup culture of scale and, bringing more revenue, like grow. And I think sometimes it doesn't leave that time to listen or check in on values. And yeah, you can end up in a place where, how did we get here? Or not being able to track where that impact is, how it is impacting me as a creator, also my employees. Like, what does that look like in the whole ecosystem of what we do too?
Yeah. So I'm going to ask you a very hard question now. Maybe you have the answer. I hope you have the answer. Actually, we're reaching an ad break, so I'm going to ask the question.
Okay.
And then when we come back from the ad break, see, I'll buy you some time so that you can respond after. So if I am, a small moving into mid-sized business, for example, and I have lots of ways I want to impact the world. And, I want to feel like I'm making a difference. But I don't want to sort of like just be led. I want to be a sustainable company. I want to be a successful company. I want to bring in income, and I want to make a difference. And I don't want to compromise my values, and I don't want to be overwhelmed. And scaling seems to be the option that is being offered to me. What do I do with all of that? How do I navigate? And maybe you face this. I suspect, based on what you've been saying, you've been sort of, you've experienced the struggle between these. So I'm curious, like, how you made these decisions, or how you've seen other impact organizations that you work with have made those decisions. So I'll just leave that for there. You're listening to The Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Branco, and our guest, Rebekah Miel. We air on Tuesdays at 5 p.m. Eastern. You can find us on LinkedIn or YouTube at talkradio.nyc, and we'll be right back in just a moment.
Hey everybody, it's Tommy D, the nonprofit sector connector, coming at you from my attic. Each week here on talkradio.nyc, I host a program, Philanthropy in Focus. Nonprofits impact us each and every day, and it's my focus to help them amplify their message and tell their story. Listen each week at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time until 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on talkradio.nyc.
Were you an essential worker during the pandemic? If you needed to learn stages of epilepsy, did you depend on advocates? Did you use new innovations to cope with mental and neurological issues? Maintaining high quality of life and keeping good mental health are what we all strive for. I'm Frank R. Harrison, host of Frank About Health, and each week top healthcare influencers, professionals, and innovators answer these questions and more. Stay tuned on Thursdays at 5 p.m. on talkradio.nyc, and I will continue to be frank about health with all of you.
Are you a business owner? Do you want to be a business owner? Do you work with business owners? Hi, I'm Stephen Fry, your small and medium-sized business, or SMB guy, and I'm the host of the new show, Always Friday. While I love to have fun on my show, we take those Friday feelings of freedom and clarity to discuss popular topics on the minds of SMBs today. Please join me and my various special guests on Friday at 11 a.m. on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Welcome back to the Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Brancu, and our guest today, Rebekah Miel. Rebekah works in the creative space, but she works with a lot of impact businesses, social impact businesses, and she herself, her business is also a social impact business. So I feel like the greatest challenge, the greatest tension is wanting to make a difference, wanting to make a big impact, wanting my company to be successful, wanting it to grow, getting messages about, scaling, and wondering like the compromises, the trade-offs, and I suspect a lot of companies in this space face the same thing. How do I manage the big desires, the big goals to make impact in lots of spaces, while also managing the overwhelm, while also managing the pressures that we put on ourselves to have a successful company that's sustainable? You probably don't have the answer to this, but you probably have thought a lot about this and might have a process that you might have thought helpful for other companies to think through. So I'm curious, have you faced those questions? If so, what have you come to? How did you come to those conclusions?
Yeah, I have definitely faced these questions. I mean, this is an ongoing process in the studio. I also see my clients face this a lot. And I think if I did have the answer, I would be a bajillionaire to be like, do these things, you can have everything. Right. It's all of that work-life balance. It is the same equation of what is the, not true balance, but what is enough, is one of the things I ask myself, like, what is enough? What does enough look like? How can I continue to create impact and find enough? So as an example, I have a client who made a decision where the work they decided to move into took away a lot of their revenue. And it really took looking very clearly about how can the business stay sustainable, to move into a place that is more aligned with values and losing a lot of revenue while also being mindful that it's a business that has to keep running. And I also think that there's never really one answer. This is like being a leader or a manager or anything where it's always evolving. It's always something you have to learn. Like, we tried this didn't fit, and being okay with both wins and failures in the process of, where you have impact, how, is this really profitable for your business? And then also thinking about ways where you can balance those two. Like, where are you willing to find some part of the business that is maybe not fully, it isn't fully dependent on impact, because sometimes that space can be fickle. So it isn't fully dependent on that work that is sort of like the ongoing bread and butter. And then from that place, how can you amplify your work or have more impact in other spaces? So it's an ongoing thing. It's something I've been thinking about recently. I recently read Betty Reed Soskin, I think I'm saying her name right. She was a park ranger, I think until she was over 100. She's like the oldest park ranger. And a friend of mine forwarded me a quote recently where she said, "In my younger years, I aspired to changing the world, and then reality kicked in and I settled for 500 square feet." So the thing I've been asking myself recently is what is my 500 square feet? I think it's foolish to think that I can, change the whole world, but what is in that 500 square feet that keeps us sustainable? And I cyclically face burnout all the time. Where do I recalibrate to be able to be sure that I am taking care of myself, the business, and my community while making impact. And it's an ongoing process of asking those questions like, yeah, what is my 500 square feet?
I really like that, and it resonates a lot. I often think about, in my words, my sphere of influence. Like within my sphere of influence, what can I do? And because of the fact that I know there's a ripple effect that happens outside of my sphere of influence, right? The people that I affect around me have other people they affect. That's the ripple effect. And that brings me comfort, to think about, I only need to impact the folks around me that like care about the things that I talk about. That's all. And then beyond that, they can be empowered to do their thing, right? Through their own ways. And that can serve a massive influence. I was just reading actually about like one of the oldest people to have recently passed away, this woman who she was an enslaved woman. She had 12 children. Those 12 children then it led to like 125 grandchildren and 250 great grandchildren, right? And I think, wow, the impact that she didn't realize she had on the world just through her one family,
Yeah.
right, is just like mind-blowing to me. And so that is a sphere of influence, our own family members and the people that they touch. And so the other thing that I'm resonating with is, it sounds like you do a lot of introspection. Like you're always sort of like thinking, what does this mean for me? And do I need to recalibrate? And you're also able to catch yourself when you're like teetering on burnout. Mm-hmm. And so I'm curious, like, what have you learned about yourself about when you're kind of overdoing it with your big audacious goals of impact? How do you sort of identify when that's happening and recalibrate? What can other people learn from that?
That's a great question. So I went through a leadership training last year, I think, maybe the year before. Time is weird, but I think one of the exercises that I did that was really hard for me, because I do feel like I pay attention and am trying to be mindful of, when I'm making that balance, was working on a polarities exercise. So like when I go too far out, what are the behaviors that are showing up? So be able to catch those behaviors beforehand, but then seeing like sometimes I'm actually way further down that like polarity than I actually should be. And I don't I feel like it's a thing I should blow up on a poster and put like in my office, that like, when you're doing this, and then when you get to like not sleeping and like only sleeping a few hours a night because you just have to get one more thing done. And then it becomes this like waterfall. Because once I think when I get into burnout, I sometimes can't see it. I'm like, no, we're just doing the thing. And it can sometimes like, your body tells you when you're burned out and it's done, or the work is impacted by that. So I think being able to have mapped out those polarities and seeing like these are sort of my tipping points that are not the end points is really helpful to see the patterns of when I'm getting burnout. But it's also another thing, like the same thing with impact. It's always a work in progress. It is regenerative. It's checking to see like, am I in the right balance? Yes or no? And that is also, it takes time and work to do that too.
Yeah, absolutely. And for those of you who are listening, I can't recall if I've talked about this. I might have very briefly, but you can think about burnout like you think about mental health, like you think about anything else on a continuum of the stress to stress impairment continuum. Stress is normal. We have it all the time. And to a certain extent, if you have the right amount of stress or anxiety, you actually perform at your highest levels. Too little stress, not enough performance. Too much stress, and it starts dipping into distress. So once you're in distress, that's a good time to look inwardly, like Rebekah mentioned. And because it's when you actually feel pain, you actually feel sadness, anger, physical exhaustion, lack of sleep, overwhelm, all of the sort of like uncomfortable or painful feelings. And it's your body saying, you're not paying attention, you're going too far, please pay attention to us, we need you right now. And that's probably when Rebekah was like, I need to recalibrate, let me slow down and think about what I need to adjust in my dials. If you don't pay attention to your body screaming at you when it's in distress, when you actually can feel the pain, then you move into impairment. And impairment is when you don't see it anymore because it's gone too far and everybody else sees it in you, because you're snapping at people, you're angry at people, you're not showing up for work, you're calling in sick, your body is like more tired than usual. And everybody's like, what's up with you? And you're like, what do you mean? Because you're not seeing it in yourself anymore. And at that point, it's harder to work your way backwards or get help. So it is knowing yourself well enough to pay attention to those distress signals, so that you can know what your body needs to recalibrate. So now my next question for you, Rebekah, based on that is, when you recalibrate and you have to sort of like slow down or step off the gas pedal or even remove something that is you're passionate about, that you really, really wanted to do you ever feel guilty or frustrated or regret? And if so, what do you do with that stuff?
That's a great question too. I used to, but I have seen that in order for me to do impact, I have to step off, I have to step back. Otherwise, it's going to create harm. Like, I used to feel like I needed to show up in all the places for everybody all the time, or like, I really don't like when people are mad at me or disappointed in me. So I just need to just keep going and keep doing this thing. And it's actually, when I've stepped off, it's been, somebody else has filled that space, or we found a solution. It hasn't, nothing has stopped. So I used to feel guilty about it, and I now feel like it is, if I'm coming from a place of making a decision that this needs to be corrected for whatever reason, and if I'm thinking about like how to create long-term sustainability, then I have to frame it as like not a failure, but a decision in I don't really like the word resilience. That's one of my least favorite words. But like, it is a choice to continue to be resilient and to find to sort of take ownership over like, I'm not the right person for this right now. I can't do all of this. I can't solve everything. I need a break. I need to take care of myself in order to keep taking care of others. So I used to feel really guilty about it. I don't anymore. It has taken a really long time to be okay with that, because, you know, I want to help everybody who asks us to, and it's just not possible. It's not sustainable. It's not a good, when you were talking about the ripples too, it's not a good example to just keep burning out. And for, you know, my kids, my family, my community, I have to be able to be like, I've reached a point, maybe even I was wrong, and I now have to step back and be okay with that decision too.
I have some thoughts about that. I love where we're going with this, but we're reaching an ad break. So we're going to take this quick ad break. You're listening to The Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Brancu, and our guest, Rebekah Miel, and we'll be right back in just a moment. Are you a high-achieving, growth-oriented leader? Are you interested in developing your authentic leadership while creating a healthy, inclusive workplace? Hi, I'm Dr. Mira Brancu, host of The Hard Skills on talkradio.nyc at 5 p.m. Eastern on Tuesdays, where we discuss how leaders develop the hard skills needed to make a greater impact. We interview experts, have live coaching, and tackle these challenges. Listen to the hard skills on Tuesday at 5 p.m. Eastern on talkradio.nyc.
Hey everybody, it's Tommy D, the nonprofit sector connector, coming at you from my attic. Each week here on talkradio.nyc, I host the program Philanthropy in Focus. Nonprofits impact us each and every day, and it's my focus to help them amplify their message and tell their story. Listen each week at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time until 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on talkradio.nyc.
Are you a conscious co-creator? Are you on a quest to raise your vibration and your consciousness? I'm Sam Leibowitz, your conscious consultant, and on my show, The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, we will touch upon all these topics and more. Listen live at our new time on Thursdays at 12 noon Eastern Time. That's The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, Thursdays 12 noon on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Welcome back to the Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Brancu, and our guest today, Rebekah Miel. Rebekah, where we left off, I'm just loving where this conversation is going, because where we left off is just us talking about working through when we have to, take a step off the gas pedal, let go of some things, even backtrack, and be okay not feeling guilty, not regretting the decision, and how hard that can be for so many of us to just accept ourselves or accept the situation and know that is not necessarily a bad thing, or not feel guilty about it, right? And it takes a while to get to that point because so many people depend on us in our personal lives as well as in our professional lives. And they might be disappointed. And that's hard to deal with when they're disappointed and you've tried so hard to think about their feelings and their needs and be there for other people, especially as somebody who is driven by making a difference, making a social impact. We don't want our decisions to negatively impact people, obviously, right? But it just makes me think a lot about how there's the company and its sort of cause, whatever that cause is, right? It might be something that's just like really important to us and that we added later after the company was built. It could be the company was literally built on that one premise and focus. But then there's like the people who lead that company, the owners of the company, the leaders of the company. And when you were talking, I was thinking a lot of what I think about is how I'm showing up in the world as the owner of a company, a public figure, whether I like it or not. I am still a public figure and people still look at me and like evaluate what I'm doing, right? I'm, and it's the same like impact on my family. I'm not a public figure there, but they still look to me and see what I do and make decisions about that. And we don't talk a lot about how, I do, but personal development is leadership development. Leadership development is personal development. There's the part of the company that is you and how you show up in the world and what that means. So I'm just curious, like your thoughts on maybe the positive impact that you make when you make hard decisions like letting go or accepting or being okay with not doing everything. Like what messages might be unexpected that might be positively changing the world when you make those decisions?
Yeah, so I think in 2017-ish, I did a school lunch debt pay down in Durham, where I won't describe all of school lunch debt, but I was trying to pay down the county's school lunch debt, which meant it was a lot of money. I think it was at that point like $120,000 at the beginning of the year. And I was pushing really hard to meet that gap so that kids could have access to lunch again and weren't restricted from extracurricular activities. And that was one point where I tipped the scale so far into being like, it was really important to me. It was important to me for a very specific reason. I needed to be able to reach this goal by the holidays. And then I realized that I'd gone past that point. What'd you say in burnout when you go to, what was the final step?
The impairment.
I was like snappy at everybody. I was like so focused on this goal. And then that is one time when I felt like, oh, if I step back, I feel like a total failure. So I was just really transparent and took accountability and communicated about it and said, in order for, like, I'm not stepping back because this is not important to me. I'm like, we might not reach this goal, but we look at all this impact that we've made to this point and the ripples that it will have. Like, before we started doing that, before we started talking about this, I didn't hear about lunch debt as much, and I was able to just be more vocal about how that was impacting students. So being able to take that step back and be clear, I got more feedback from being like, hey, this is hard and I'm taking a step back. I mean, not more feedback, more like reassurance and people saying like, thank you so much for sharing that, than being like, oh, I pushed really hard and I reached the goal. But talking about all that messy middle stuff where it's like, I tried really hard to do this thing and it didn't work. And I think when I am clear about both of those things, like this is all the hard work that goes into it, and then this is what it happened, like how I get to a point where I need to step back. I think that is actually sometimes more valuable than reaching the goal, because, especially in the age of social media, we see all of the shiny things. And I think being accountable and transparent and like authentic about all of the pieces that go into it. Like, I can just say, I won this recognition from B Corps or whatever, but also being like, this is why it was hard to get there. And these are like the actual steps. I think that is in service of like anybody in the impact space, all of us doing this work, all of us who want to make a difference, like being able to continue to do this work because we're not doing it alone.
Yeah. I'm letting it just soak in, that don't let the metric of the impact be the enemy of the impact. Because right, like you're just turning it into another productivity thing instead of like evaluating what was the initial focus and goal, and let's not take away from that. The other thing that I'm pulling out of this, and you shared this quote with me that I'm connecting to what you just said, that I'd love to unpack a little bit. It's not about the size of the impact I make, but the depth and authenticity of it. Say more about that. Let's close out on that one.
Okay, that's a good one to close out on. I think, so if we go back to school lunch debt or any of the other fundraising things that we did, it's not, did I raise $1 million or 2 million or like whatever the huge number is? I'm not reaching a metric, because those metrics can always move, but it is, do I know that my neighbor who was impacted by a explosion in downtown Durham, do I know that they have rent for the next month? Do I know that groceries are covered? Do I know that we're finding a way to create impact in our own community through whatever work that we're doing? Is that actually true to where we set out? Like, if we bring it full circle to the beginning, like, is it true to is it my being authentic to my values in the work that I do, instead of this other idea of scaling. I think what you said about those ripples, like that's thinking about scaling in a different way. Like you don't have to be responsible as yourself, as one person or one business for all of the scale or all of the impact, but where you are and what you do and what your like unique skills are, how are you authentically showing up, listening, and creating impact in your 500 square feet.
Beautiful, beautiful. Now, everybody, if you want to find out more about Rebekah Miel, you can go to Miel Creative, M-I-E-L, creative.com. If you're watching right now on the recording or live, this is her beautifully designed, of course, website. You can see that, or you can check it out later. So, everyone, what did you take away from today? And more importantly, what is one small change you can implement this week based on what you learned from Rebekah? Share it with us on LinkedIn at Mira Brancu or talkradio.nyc, or find Rebekah Miel online as well, so we could cheer you on. We're also on Facebook and Instagram, Twitter, Twitch, Apple, Spotify, Amazon podcasts, all over the place. Help us increase our visibility, reach, and impact by leaving a review. The stuff we talk about on this show is part of our research-based strategic leadership pathway roadmap, and we also teach it in our Terrascope Leadership Academy and other socially conscious programming for leaders in disrupted learning and innovation industries. You can go to gotowerscope.com to learn more. Thank you to talkradio.nyc for hosting. I'm Dr. Mira Brancu, your host of the Hard Skills Show. Thank you, Rebekah. Really appreciate that you joined us today.
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate this conversation and also having the time and space to think about this too.
Absolutely. It was a great, deep conversation. Hopefully you all got something out of it. Have a great rest of your day wherever you're tuning in from. Bye, everybody.